and welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
And each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is author Hailey Piper. She's the author of titles such as the Bram Stoker award-winning Queen of Teeth, Your Mind is a Terrible Thing, and No Gods for Drowning. Welcome to the show!
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. We're really excited, and I love your pick. We'll get into that a little bit later, but your pick is, I was like, yes! So, okay, I am about, I would say 70% through No Gods for Drowning. I was hoping to get it finished before the recording today, but I couldn't. But I'm really, really enjoying it. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about it?
Sure. That's the most difficult one to tell people about. It's about a woman trying to, the gods usually have been protecting mankind in this world for thousands of years, and suddenly they're gone. This woman who's the daughter of a god is trying to get one back, and the best way to do that is offer blood sacrifices. So it's kind of a mix of her trying to bring her mother back so that she can protect people, and detectives trying to figure out who's murdering people ritualistically all over the city, and the woman's lover, who is she is trying to just protect the city herself, as like a flood fighter against these monsters from the sea.
Hell yeah.
There's a lot going on in this book.
It's a fantasy, it's crime, it's horror, so it's busy.
Well, that's what kind of drew me to it initially, was that there's a little bit of like eldritchness going on to this, like cosmic horror. There's fantasy. There's almost like a noir detective story going on here.
Yeah.
There's like a lot of subgenres at play. Is that what kind of draws you to literature? Is multiple genres, or is this something you're trying new?
I read broadly.
Okay.
I think that's a good thing to do, for me at least. And I kind of I don't think about genre while I'm writing the story. Like, usually it's going to lean in a horror direction, but like, genre is kind of a marketing problem. In the end, which is why this ends up being on like different shelves depending on the bookstore you go into.
Didn't you tweet about that yesterday or something?
Yes.
You were like, I've seen my book in multiple sections of Barnes and Noble. Like...
Yeah, it's been in the horror section, it's been the thriller section, and with mystery, and now yesterday I walked into one and it was in the fantasy section, which that's fine. Yeah, that's the kind of book it is.
But that's what I love about it, is that it pulls in everything that I love. I'm a huge fantasy fan. There's like one of my favorite video games is Bloodborne, and this was giving me a lot of like, Bloodborne's so good. This is giving me like Yarnum vibes to it in some ways, like just the way it's described. I was like, this is doing everything for me.
Well, thank you.
I'm glad you like Bloodborne. Bloodborne is fantastic.
Oh my god, Bloodborne's one of my favorites.
It's mine too. I've spent so many hours playing through that game.
Yeah.
Well, and then I also wanted to touch on Queen of Teeth, because that's one of my favorites, and I wanted to hear more. Well, one, tell our listeners about what it is, and then I wanted to hear more about the inspiration for Queen of Teeth.
That one's easier to talk about because it's very straightforward. Although, it's also a genre blend. It's horror, it's sci-fi, it's romance. But it's about a woman who, after a one-night stand, discovers she has teeth in her vagina. And that escalates into discovering it might have something to do with this secret secret corporate experiment. And they're hunting her down because this incident years ago means that certain people are half company property, and the teeth themselves are just one part of what's happening to her as it grows tentacles and a mind of its own.
Oh, dang.
And also, one of the people hunting her is the woman that she's starting to kind of get into a relationship with, and the woman is also getting into a relationship with the monster that's coming out of her. So yeah, it's a busy book too.
Hell fucking yeah. I wanted to hear more about where kind of the idea came from, because I'm obsessed. Okay, I saw the movie Teeth as a child about vagina dentata, and so I've kind of had a fascination with vagina dentata, and then seeing that you wrote about it, I was like, oh my god, finally, there's not a lot of things out there about tooth vagina, so I was super excited. Yes, I know, a weird thing to be like interested in, but here I am.
Oh. I mean, the weirdly the concept was a little broader in some ways, in the sense that originally it was going to be multiple people who had vagina dentata, and it was almost kind of a normal thing at that point for like, oh yeah, there's some people who have that. And the main character was someone else too, and Yaya was kind of a minor character. But then as I was writing it, I was like, Yaya is way more interesting than the main character I'm working with. I want to write a book about her. And then that kind of just started shaping the world a little bit more, where it was like, she's the first one who's got this condition. And once that started happening with all like the sci-fi stuff and the bigger monster stuff and it turning into a love story, I was like, I just want to go where no vagina dentata story has gone before. And by the end of it, I think that I accomplished that.
I would agree, 100%. Well, and I wanted to hear more, like, because you've said that there's always a lot going on in your books, and how do you kind of go about starting with world building with your books? And like, do you have like a process or kind of a way of thinking into starting to build the worlds in these narratives?
Usually the way it goes, and this is not every single time, but most of the time, it's that the story dictates the world first. Okay. And then whatever I'm working with from the world at that point ends up bouncing back and reflecting on the story. And so they kind of have to ping pong what's going on back and forth, influencing each other. And then by the end of it, hopefully it's all cohesive. So like, I knew I wanted, like, for example, I knew I wanted there to be this, like, you know, big pharma, like, antagonist situation. But I didn't know that it was like a parallel present where, like, you know, that's one of those things that came out in the writing. It was like, oh, I think Nancy Reagan was president after Ronald Reagan. And then that's where it splits from the real world a little bit. And then you get into fun little things like, you know, that once you do that, you can kind of change more. It's like, oh, well, in this world, then the cops have tanks. And then it was kind of just like, well, that ends up influencing the story because then Yaya has to deal with that when she's being pursued. Yeah. It just goes back and forth. But then also, like, there's things that are similar to our world. Like, she's, like, obsessed with Looney Tunes or, you know, just, like, it's still Newark, New Jersey, even though it's changed. So, yeah, that's kind of how it goes about. It's like, you know, something's going to come first. It's going to affect this thing. That's going to affect the original thing. It just goes back and forth until hopefully it all works out in the end.
So like I said, I'm listening. So I wanted to say one thing. I am listening to the audiobook of No Gods for Drowning, and Jodie Harris is the narrator, and she is doing such a fantastic job with this book. I love her. She's so fantastic. Good with this.
It's a lot of, I think all of my narrators have been amazing. I think she had the most work to do though, because she's juggling like 3 or 4 accents in some scenes. She's having to pronounce all these funky god names and cities and stuff. Like we actually went back and forth, with pronunciation and stuff. And I was like, anything I didn't cover, just do your best. Cause like there's so many things in there. And then just like having to hit the emotional notes of like many POV characters actually, because there's 3 main POVs, but then there's a bunch of little POVs throughout. Yep. And you got bits where the tense gets weird because of certain, like you said, eldritch things are happening. There's even a song at one point, and
yes, I was like, she sings.
Yeah, she sent me an MP3 and was like, is this what you were thinking of, like, for the tune? And I emailed back, I was like, that is exactly how it sounded in my head.
That was amazing. When she started singing, I was like, holy crap.
Yeah, she's fantastic. She's so talented. She's so talented.
Yeah, I loved it. But so, like, I think I'm about 4 hours left in the book, because it's a longer one.
It is. It's my longest book.
So I don't know exactly how it ends, and I don't want it to be spoiled at all. No. But I am curious.
You've got like some more twists ahead.
I know. Every single time when specific characters die or something, I'm like, no, I can't believe that just happened. But it's really working for me. But I am curious. I really enjoy this world. Is this like the first book, or will we have more in this world? Is there?
So that's a complicated question. Yes, okay. We're going to be going back to the world. I don't know if there will be, like, I don't know if this is more like the first in a series so much as like the introduction to a world, and then there'll be other stories kind of exploring that world. Like I have a short story coming out this year, but the anthology hasn't been announced yet, so I can't say it. But that story takes place during the Holy War, earlier in this world. And then I'm working on a novella that also takes place in this world. But like I have a sequel in mind, but that's not really like the next thing on the, I have to kind of write what I feel like writing. And I'm just like, I'm not ready to write that yet. But yes, I'm planning to do more stories and more books set in this world.
Cool. 'Cause I really enjoy this world.
Thank
and
you.
like I said, I don't know if this is like a self-contained story or not, but I want to know more about this world. So that's exciting.
I want to try to make each thing self-contained in its way, like that this could be your first experience with age and such, and that's enough. Like that's like that you can just get a feel for it from that, even if it doesn't cover everything.
Hell yeah. Cool.
Well, so Hailey, I wanted to hear more about also like how you got started as a writer. Like, have you always loved writing, or like what was kind of how your relationship to writing growing up?
Let's see. I mean, I always liked telling stories. I think I started writing like and people would write stuff down for like people who could write faster, adults. I started writing very simply though. Like when I was 8, I loved Jurassic Park, so I wrote Cretaceous Park, which was like, it was like, how long was it? Like 6 pages? But for some reason I thought that was as long as the novel, because that's how long it took me to write, was as long as it took me to read the book.
Wow, that's
I love
incredible.
That.
And then I think a couple years later, I think I mentioned this on Twitter, where I tried to by hand write a book where it was about aliens came to Earth in UFOs and wanted to make giant like chickens, and that was their plan to take the book, which I kind of referenced in No Gods for Drowning at one point, when Alex is like, what if the Dawn Gods came and they made chickens super smart? Yeah.
Just got to that part.
That's incredible.
He's just making an analogy. It didn't happen, but and I remember there was one where I was trying to write a very complicated story about werewolves, where it was like many different points of view, and I didn't really have a plan. It was just random scenes, which is fine now because I'm experienced. I can do that, and then like, okay, I'll weave this into a narrative as I figure it out. But like back then, it was just like I was looking at these sheets of paper, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing.
It's amazing. And then, like, what did you read? Horror, sci-fi, like scarier stuff growing up?
Yeah.
Too? Okay.
I mean, with adult novels, it definitely started with Michael Crichton, and I think that was solely because of Jurassic Park. And then I was like reading Sphere and Congo and stuff like that.
Oh wow. Okay.
With kids stuff, though, definitely horror right away. With like Goosebumps.
Yep.
Okay.
I wish I had discovered Christopher Pike back then, because those books seem to be wild. But my mom was reading Dean Koontz, and I went into her room. I don't know what was going on, but I needed something to read. And I was like, I think I was 10, I think. Anyway, I went into a room. I couldn't have been older than 10, so I was 9 or 10, but I'm pretty sure 10. But I went into a room and I saw Mr. Murder sitting in her, like she had this cute little wicker basket that she'd put whatever books she'd finished reading, and it had all these like grisly thrillers and stuff. So I pick up Mr. Murder, and it's about like how this writer doesn't know his blood has been used in a cloning experiment, and that clone thinks he's the writer. So it's like going to his, like it's stalking his family, thinking that like, oh, this guy stole my life. And yeah, it's...
I think I've read that one. I've read a number of Dean Koontz books, but now that you're explaining it, I was like, I
Wow.
think I have read that one.
That's one of the tamer ones, I think, which is a good place to start. And then I read Watchers, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I loved Watchers. That was like the super smart dog and the monkey monster and stuff.
Yeah.
But then, like, his new book at the time came out, Intensity. And my mom, like everybody, my mom and all her friends were buying Intensity, and I saw her reading it, and I was like, "Can I read that when you're done?" She probably should have said no, but she didn't. She was like, "Yeah, when I'm done, you can read it." And so then, like when she finished it, it was just there, and I started reading it, and it's about this guy who like goes into places and he murders whole families, and he got this girl kidnapped, and I was 10. I know I was 10 for this. And he's got this girl kidnapped, and that he's he's essentially showing her photographs of the murdered families because he wants her, because he thinks he can hear when someone's mind breaks. And this woman, like, he doesn't know that that there was a friend staying with the last family he killed, and she's like been hiding in his RV to keep away from him, but then she ends up at his house, and
It's High Tension has taken a lot of plot points from this book, I have to say.
Which one came
really?
first? Because I don't know whether it was that one or...
High Tension came out in 2000, so like
okay.
Dean Koontz's
this
books
came
had already
first.
existed, but yeah, High Tension has a very similar setup, shall we say?
Wait,
to
really?
Yeah.
Really? I've never read any Dean Koontz. I just remember when I worked at a library, I shelved his stuff all the time, and like I just never thought anything. I was like, oh, I equated him to like old people books. I was in high school. I was a shitty teenager. What can I say? But now
See, the difference is I was little, so it's like, these are adult books.
Mm-hmm.
See, exactly. But then you got to experience that me being a judgmental high schooler was like, oh, these aren't scary. But now, the past couple of years, I'm like, I should read some Dean Koontz because his stuff sounds absolutely like so creepy and
it's pretty. I haven't read anything from him since I was like 11. I was mowing through them when I was younger, so I don't know how any of it holds up. I remember the one I really should not have read was The Voice of the Night, but at that point, my mom was buying the mass market paperbacks because you could get them cheap, and she was just buying like a chunk of them just to keep me like occupied because I was just reading through them so fast. Weren't those the days when you could just mow through books like that?
I miss it so much. I was thinking about that the other day where I was like, man, I used to read so many books and now I struggle just to finish one, like at all. It's so bad.
But sometimes you find one that really, like I'm reading, I've got an arc of Catch Your Own Award's new book that's coming out later this year, Looking Glass Sound. I have been up way past my bedtime, not even noticing the time pass because I'm so sucked into the book. And I love when that happens.
Oh, it's the best. I'm reading Gideon the Ninth. Everyone's heard it, like the sci-fi lesbian
you don't have to explain that. It's just like, oh yeah, Gideon the Ninth. Yeah.
Yeah. That was one that got me back into wanting to read again because I was like staying up until 2 a.m. reading. I was like, oh my god, this is ridiculous, but it's a nice
not
feeling.
Even the book's fault. It's the social media because we've got infinite scrolling. You never run out of stuff, so it's just killed our brains. And it's like I put my phone on the other side of the room when it's my reading time a lot because I'm just like that's the only way. Otherwise it's not even that I think I bet something cool or interesting is happening. It's habit. My hand just does it at this point.
Yes.
Even if I shuffle around my social media tabs, even that's enough to stall me from actually opening them. Sometimes, like I'll just switch them around so that it breaks the habit. It's like if I have to move to another page, that's one more step. It's like, do I really need to check Twitter right now? What do I expect out of it?
Seriously,
well, that's actually really smart. That's actually a really smart strategy. I might have to start doing that because
I think we have to exhibit. It's not to just quote this term again, but it's like it's some level of like having to exert self-care in that we have all these systems that are wrecking our concentration and attention spans, and we kind of have to be proactive about taking that control back.
Yeah.
Huh. Wow.
Huh.
Back to I was
Sorry.
like, how do I transition? No,
don't
not at all. I was like,
apologize.
there's just, I can't transition. I'm not clever. Back to a time when our attention span maybe wasn't as bad as children. But so we've talked about the books, but then what was your relationship to like horror films as a kid?
I mean, I loved and was scared of a lot of them. The ones that were easy for me were like the Universal horror monster movies, and like nobody wanted to watch them with me because they were all like, this is boring, it's in black and white, blah blah blah. But I was just like it's time for Dracula, it's time for House of Dracula, it's time for the whole, like, I love Creature from the Black Lagoon was my favorite. I had to have the whole trilogy. Wolfman, Frankenstein, like the Mummy, all that stuff. I was just like, yeah, I was just like absorbed with old black and white movies, like the Harryhausen movies and stuff. Like just like
Clash
that was my jam.
Those.
Yeah, Clash of the Titans, 20 Million Miles to Earth. Yeah, just
the Sinbad movies. Yeah,
Seventh Voyage of Sinbad was like, that was just like, I saw that shortly before Jurassic Park came out, and so for a little brief moment of my childhood, that was like peak special effects. And I'd seen Ghostbusters and stuff, but for some reason that wasn't the same as seeing that Cyclops come out of the cave and like grabbing sailors and stuff. Yeah.
It's so good.
And like fighting a dragon, and it's just like you weren't seeing that stuff a lot of the time unless it was a Godzilla movie, which was also great, but it wasn't the same because I knew it was a guy in a suit for the Godzilla, even though I love the Godzilla movies.
Yeah.
Adult horror though, that happened by accident. It usually happened by accident. My dad was supposed to bring home a VHS that a coworker had recorded off TV of the movie Troll, which he figured was pretty kid-friendly, and I'm sure it is. I haven't actually gotten around to seeing Troll, but that wasn't the movie that was on the VHS.
Oh, no.
It was, I was 5, and my sister was 4, and the movie was H.P. Lovecraft's The Unnameable. I don't know how much it has to do with the with the Lovecraft story, but this was full-on nudity, blood, people's heads getting cut off, just cursing. It was, and like kind of Sam Raimi creature cam POV. Like we only made it about a half hour into the movie, and I still think that was pretty impressive for a 5-year-old.
Wow.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that was the movie that, like, that's not my scarred for life pick. And I think probably because I did watch it when I was 20, obviously years later. And I was just like, I wasn't very impressed. I was like, I think that the only reason this scared me is because I was 5 and I had no other experience with this kind of stuff. I think even if I had been 7, I wouldn't have been scared by it. But it was just one of those things where just like, that was like throwing me in the deep end kind of situation.
Right. Oh my God. It's gonna be Troll. Absolutely not. No, it's an H.P. Lovecraft adaptation with monsters.
And so I kind of was pulling at more adult horror on as side by side with the Universal stuff, or I know that was adult horror back in the day, but like we had a weekend. This was a very down bummer weekend because how these movies end. But I happened to grab from the video store Carnosaur, the 70s Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and Night of the Living Dead.
Wow. Oh wow! And what a trifecta!
Right. It was definitely something to watch, and I'd never seen any of those movies before, but none of those have a happy ending.
I've never seen Carnosaur, but the other ones absolutely.
Carnosaur, I mean, it's hard because on the one hand, it's a Roger Corman film it in a couple months ripoff to get it in the stores before Jurassic Park releases in theaters type of movie. On the other hand, there is some impressive and interesting stuff. It is a very bleak movie. It is like a tonal opposite of Jurassic Park. It is it is such a depressing movie.
Huh.
But there's some creepy stuff in it here and there. It's definitely got the gore factor.
I'm looking on it on Wikipedia or on IMDb, and there's a trailer playing, and I'm like, this looks wild.
It's it was one of those things where I kind of forgot a lot of it, and I wrote it off as just that was that weird freaky dinosaur movie where they get pregnant with the dinosaur eggs and stuff. But then I watched a little, like, somebody was kind of like doing a little mini review of it recently, like, on YouTube, and it was like, I saw the guy was like trying to get away from the giant carnosaur up into these pipes and stuff, and I was just like, I feel like Dino Crisis is based off of this more than anything else.
Dino Crisis. Oh, that's a great game. Where's our Dino Crisis remake?
I know, right? Come on, Capcom.
Was that an arcade game?
No, this was like a Resident Evil style game on the PlayStation.
Oh, okay. I played something similar, I feel like, but at an arcade, and that's why I was like,
there's something, but there's Time Crisis. That was an arcade game.
Might be what I'm thinking. Of putting dinosaurs in it. Oops.
That'd be fun, actually. Time Crisis with dinosaurs. That was one of my favorite games to go to at the arcade. Time Crisis.
Yep, me too.
Wow.
But so we have talked. Well, actually, okay, listeners, we're going to take a quick break, and then we will come back, and then we will talk about your Scarred for Life choice, Hailey. And we're back! Yay! All right. So, Hailey, what film did you bring with you today as your Scarred for Life pick?
My Scarred for Life pick is The Blob 1988.
Okay. So in The Blob 1988, a deadly entity from space crashes near a small town and begins consuming everyone in its path. Panic ensues as shady government scientists try to contain the horrific creature.
All right, Hailey, this is one of my favorite movies of all time. When I was a kid, it was one of my favorite movies as a kid. I'm so excited to talk about this. So bring us back to the beginning. How did you see this movie? Why did you see it? Why is it your Scarred for Life pick? Give us your horror story. I cannot wait.
All right, so just some brief background there. Back then, TNT would have Monster Vision each Friday. And this was before Joe Bob Briggs. So it was just a lot of older stuff, and one of the movies they'd play a lot of the time was the old Steve McQueen, The Blob from the 50s. Mm-hmm. And I really liked that movie. It was fun. It was, it was just a good time. So I used to also peruse the TV guide. So I happened to see that The Blob was going to be on, I think it was USA or something, on Saturday afternoon. It's like, oh, that's not the usual monster time. It's not the usual monster channel, but I can watch The Blob. So I turn it on, and then we're slowly descending through the clouds as creepy 80s style credits play of this very somber synthesizer music. And I'm like, this isn't The Blob. But then it says The Blob. And I'm just like, but it's not The Blob. There's no song. Where's the song? Where's the little squiggly lines?
Beware of the blob, it creeps and leaps and glides. Oh my god.
Right. So I'm just kind of watching out of morbid curiosity at this point. I'm 9 years old, by the way. So I didn't understand. Yes, exactly. So I didn't understand what remakes were. Uh-huh. I didn't understand a lot of things with movies. So I'm watching, and I don't know these characters. It's there's no they're not driving around in the Cadillacs and stuff. There's Brian on his bike. There's the football game. There's just kind of small town stuff happening. I'm just kind of riding it out. And then it gets to where they're about 10 minutes in, right before the first commercial break, where the thing comes down from the sky, the meteor hits. And I'm like, okay, I'm on familiar territory again here. It's this is kind of like The Blob. And then it's a little different because, in the original movie, and it's been a long time since I've seen it, it kind of just falls onto his hand, the little blob. And then he can't shake it off, but he's clearly distressed, but it's not like you don't know how bad it's going to get yet. This blob launches onto the guy's hand, and then it clearly is not only distressing but painful, and he's running around. He runs into Brian out in the woods and then tries to chop his hand off with an axe, and then I'm just like oh wow, they didn't try that in the other Blob, but then it just covers up the wound.
The Blob says
right, it's just, and I'm just like, at that point, I'm horrified. Because one, this is not the Blob I was expecting, but two, I had never seen somebody chop at their own limb in a movie before and then blood coming out. And I'm just sitting there like this, like watching on the tiny TV in my parents' bedroom, and they're downstairs doing something. I don't know where my siblings were. So I keep watching, like, I can't look away. And it cuts to commercial. I'm still sitting there. So then it gets back and we're in the hospital and Paul hears the noise as he's like filling out stuff, and he goes to check on the old guy. And at this point, I'm still thinking Paul is the hero of the movie. I don't think that it's Meg or Brian. And so it shows the old guy turning away and his eyes going up into his head, showing the whites of his eyes and that big lump of the blob under his skin in his throat. And that's the point where I quickly changed the channel. Because I had come across situations where something really scary or gory was going to happen. And I was like, if I just change the channel for a minute, I'll come back. That part will be over. It'll be fine. It worked. Like, I remember we were watching Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I didn't know what was going to happen when the propeller of the plane is going towards that one big guy that Indiana Jones is fighting. So I was like, oh, this is going to be bad. I turned off the TV for a second, for like a minute, and then I turned it back on, and I didn't know that you don't see anything.
Right.
So I figured this logic will prevail here. The Blob is no different from Raiders of the Lost Ark. And so I turn it back and I see the part where it drops onto Paul, and then it cuts to Meg, and I'm like, okay, so the movie did the channel change essentially for me. It brought me back to Meg where or it cuts. Does it cut to that, or is that the part with the Jello? I can't remember, but it cuts away.
Oh, no, the Jello part is what I think the guy is cutting. Is he cutting off his? Is he not? I don't know if he's cutting it off, but that was my favorite smash cut in this movie when they smash cut.
It's really funny.
Yeah, no, it definitely cuts back to Meg.
But okay, so then I think now it's just going to be like in the original Blob where after they find, like, I remember the doctor being like, it must have absorbed the old man completely. And you just see the little wriggling stop motion, jam blob. So I was like, okay, that's what we will see. Instead, it's when Meg finds Paul being essentially melted by this thing slowly, and his face you can see his eyes and his face is melting, and he's reaching out and his arm pops off when she grabs it. And like his skull caves in from the thing melting him. I think I only stared as long as I did because I was paralyzed, and then I turned it off and I was done. I was out of there. Like I couldn't watch the rest of the movie at that point. I was just like, it was too much for a 9-year-old. And I'd seen Night of the Living Dead, and I still think that's a scary movie. And I'd seen all this other shit, and that was just, I couldn't. It was too much. It overwhelmed me.
Broke that brain.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I couldn't go back for years. It was so many years before I just turned on the TV to some channel, and it was like a later part of the movie that wasn't like as bad yet. But I was like, oh, this is that Blob. And I was just like, change the channel. I saw the climax at some point before I saw the rest of the movie. And that, honestly, the climax is the tamest part because it's just so bombastic. That's like, okay, like this is fine. This is, I mean, it's it's rough. Like there's bad stuff is happening, but it's not as bad as like Paul's face melting and all that horrible stuff. So like after that, I was like, okay, I think someday I can come back to this and watch the whole movie. And that was only a few years ago. That was in like 2016, I think, that I finally came back and watched the whole movie. And I was like 2016. I was like, it was in my 30s by then. So I was like, all right, I'm going to sit down and watch this. I was scared even to watch it then. And I was right to be, because it was still horrifying.
It is horrifying.
I sat down and I was like, I'm not turning this off. I'm in my 30s. Grow up. And I was still like, when it got to the scene with Paul, I was just like, this is so much worse than I remembered. And then it gets to the part where like Paul's like rapist friend is like trying to like get that girl in the car, and they like she caves inward because the blob is inside her.
Yes.
I saw it like moving, like you could see how fast it was going over the grass, and I was just like, the old blob was never this fast. And there's so many terrible scenes. The drain and the phone booth and the poor projectionist in the movie theater, and then all those people in the movie theater, the sewer kid, like there's just on and on. There's these horrifying moments.
It doesn't let up.
No.
It doesn't. Every 10 minutes there's something new.
Exactly. Like I feel like a lot of complaints I see about horror movies, like you only get a little bit of the monster, you only get one moment. But in this movie, it's like
hold my
this
beer.
is like
Relentless.
hold my beer. Like we start going and going and going, and you just see people completely like melted
Digested.
and reassembled. Ew, I know. It's just like, well, and so this was my first time seeing this movie. Actually,
Oh, wow.
I had never seen it before, and I don't know why I'd never seen it before. I think I thought of the remake, the original and the remake as one and the same, and I've heard about the Blob, but I just like it never kind of came up. But I watched it last night, and my husband was like, "Oh, this movie's rough," and I was like, "Okay." And as I was watching it, I yelled a couple times. I was like, "Oh my god!" Like when Paul is killed, my husband looks over and said, "Bet you thought that was the hero, didn't you?" And I was like, "I did think that was the hero." And you know, we have the sheriff that we're introduced to, and you're like, "Oh, the hero!" And then he is. So my favorite in this though is like the kills aren't like, they're not always this big like, oh my god, that person is dead. It's like the sheriff, you just see his face blinking and floating in the blob,
and it's so sad.
It is sad because it's not one of those movies where it's just like, here's a bunch of people you'll dislike and then they get killed one by one. It's the movie where it's like, yeah, there's some assholes, but there's also a lot of nice people, like kind people,
yes.
like that, like the I forget her name at the diner, but she's like, we're closed, and he's like, oh come on, it's like, okay, I'll get you a sandwich. Okay, here's the last of this stuff. She's
Fran.
She's so gentle with everyone, and then she just has that dreadful, like long drawn out bit of the blob just condensing around the phone booth, and her trying to keep it out with her foot and stuff, and then finally it just all crashes in. It's just one of those movies that's just like, you sit with the horror of it, like you really do, and it's so much worse to me than somebody getting like carved apart by like Jason or something, or even like a Saw movie. Like this is worse than that to me.
Well, and like, because there isn't, well, one, it feels like it's so much harder to stop it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it's not a person.
There's no decisions even being made. It's not intelligent. It's just doing
Hungry.
Things.
Like,
right,
it's
exactly.
just it wants to consume, and there's nothing you can do about it. And, you know, I was thinking a lot about how movies like The Crazies, specifically I'm thinking of the remake of The Crazies, and how, like, 30 Days of Night, movies like that kind of, I feel like, follow a similar structure of, like, very, and The Blob does it the best now that I've seen it. It's, like, getting you to know the people that live there, but, like, in a very kind of quick way. It's not spending a lot of time, but you still get the sense of, like, community, small town, who these people are. And like,
yeah,
there are assholes, but it's like small town America assholes. It's not like when we meet the scientists who have actually like bioengineered this thing, who are like, it's fine if a couple hundred people get eaten in town. It's all worth it for defense of America from Russia. And it's just like, yeah.
It's so wild because I didn't really pick up on until this watch that up until Meg and Brian correct them, they think it's just a disease.
Yeah, a virus. They're like, this is a virus.
And they don't realize that, like, even after they're told what's actually going on, they're not prepared for it. They go in and they see it for the first time, and they're just like, holy shit. Like, they didn't, even when they're prepared, they do not know, they're not prepared.
That's what I actually love about this movie. I think this movie is very smart. more smart than a lot of people give it credit for.
It's a great script by Frank Darabont.
It really is. And I think that it really plays on... So, like, one of the things that I think we see a lot of in the 80s is a lot of 50s nostalgia. There's a lot of movies that embrace that. And this movie is the perfect way to tackle that because the first movie came out, the original came out in the 50s. And so we're remaking a 50s movie. That movie was very golly gee willikers. I enjoyed it. But, like, it's, if you look at, like, the strange history behind the creation of it, it was being produced by a bunch of religious people who wanted to get into filmmaking.
Oh. And
so there's like a lot of like, there was this article on Den of Geek that I had read at one point, and it was talking about how, so this guy named Jack H. Harris, who was a Pennsylvania film distributor, he was determined to break into the movie production. He turned to a Pennsylvania-based studio called Valley Forge, which was a company that had made about 250 religious films and had never attempted a feature before. And so all of a sudden, that became this. And so there's a lot of golly gee feel to that original film. It's very optimistic, I would say. That
it's like the army will come to save us.
Yes, the police will save us. Everyone will save us. Everyone is like authority good. This movie is saying, okay, the popular jock kid that would have been like the main character in that one, he's a date rapist. We have the police that are just kind of farting about and not really figuring things out. We have the military coming in and all of a sudden they're authoritarian and they're not here to save the day. They're here to kill you. So it's definitely, it takes the kind of, if you've seen the original Blob like you, Hailey, and coming to this one, this is like a nihilistic, no, fuck you to the original Blob's more happiness. It's so smart.
I think it still pays like decent tribute to the original in some ways. Like it's definitely not against the original, but it is against the original's like naivete. Mm-hmm. Like they're definitely both products of their time. And like I do love that this, like, people don't respect this one as much as I feel they should. Like there's two other 50s to 80s horror remakes, The Fly and The Thing, that get a lot more respect than this one. I'm like, I think that's the trio to me. Like that those three movies do an excellent job of taking what were at their time good 50s movies. I still love the original The Thing, the Howard Hawks movie, but they do an excellent job of making these more layered, I'd say, movies out of those premises.
Yeah, same. Absolutely.
I was thinking a lot about The Thing watching The Blob because I was like, wait. So we have, obviously, I love The Thing. I have my poster back here, and we have all those iconic moments of, like, the head and the head spider. But we get just as many, if not more, iconic moments, I think, in this one, too, with the body horror. And I was so surprised, you know, especially with Peter's death, with him trying to come out of the blob.
Right.
When the little kid is getting...
I know. You don't expect it. Ugh.
Like... and we have the whole, like, she dives to save him. She's going, you're like, oh, she's going to come up with him and save him. It's fine. Right. And then she comes up and she's like, uh-oh, she doesn't have him and his half-digested corpse. And I think
he's still alive.
Exactly. Like, still alive and screaming. Like, the most horrendous, like, I think what this one, I think, is even scarier than The Thing is, like, you people are aware that these people are in pain because they are being digested. They aren't just being, like, assimilated into an organism. Like, they are being fully digested.
Right.
And that is so much scarier and painful. And that is so much scarier to me. That's not knocking The Thing. But, like, the concept of the monster is even scarier with just, like, the pain factor and the death factor here. Like, Jesus Christ.
Like, the dread for me of The Thing is that you don't know who to trust. Like, you don't know who's the thing. It's not so much the thing itself. Like, because each time they discover who's the thing, they dispatch it pretty quickly. It's just a matter of, like, it can get you in your sleep. It can get you, like, this, like, the Blob is just, it has, like, I think that's the difference also is, like, The Thing is clearly thinking. It's very intelligent. Mm-hmm. And the Blob is not intelligent at all. There's nothing going on in there. It is purely, it's a giant amoeba. It's just doing what it does. The only time it slows down is if it's just had a bit to eat and it's kind of working that into energy. Like we see that in the hospital when it leaves Meg alone, and then when it goes into the sewer and the priest sees it, which is, that ending is something else. Like, but yeah.
So this was like a favorite of mine growing up because it hit like this perfect spot for me of like incredible effects that like, I was at that age. I probably saw this when I was, I think maybe 9. It came out in
Jesus.
88. So I would have been 7 when it came out. So maybe I was 8 or 9 when it came out on VHS. But like for me, none of the horror, like it went way over my head. I was just like, I cannot believe they're doing these effects, because I had grown up. My dad was like was huge into old school horror, so like I had watched a lot of the Universal monster movies, of course, and The Blob was one of his favorites, and we had that on VHS, and I would watch it all the time. And so when this one came up, like I was like, it did not scare me for some reason. I don't know why, because it is absolutely terrifying watching it as an adult. But as a kid, I was just like, how did they do that? I was like so enthralled in like the special effects. And there's no nudity in this movie. There's no sex. So my parents were like, sure, you can watch this one, because they had this whole weird ass thing about not
American
seeing
thing.
Yep. No titties for Terry was like the joke on the podcast, because I'd have to cover my eyes. And I'm like, well, okay, whatever. But yeah, so this movie didn't have any of that. It was just special effects, special effects, special effects. And I was like, this is my thing. And I was so excited by the end of the movie, you're bringing up the Reverend, because I was like, oh, I want to see the sequel. We never got a fucking sequel because no one went to go see this movie. But in my head, I kept like asking my parents, like, have you heard anything about the Blob sequel yet? Have you heard anything about the Blob sequel? I would just like years later be like, when is the Blob sequel coming out? Because this movie suggested there's going to be a sequel, and you never
Lord
got
just
one.
didn't give him a sign.
I know. Rude.
Where's your God now?
But
In the sewers.
I think for me, I guess I probably would have been like that too if I'd been able to make it to the end of the movie back then. But I think for me, the implication on its own is scarier, because the idea that he can just at any moment just end the world with this thing is just, ugh.
It's horrifying.
There's one thing for it to happen by accident, but like for somebody to deliberately put it in places, like that could be something that you couldn't stop potentially.
It's a good idea for a sequel too.
It is. It's just, I don't know what you'd do. I guess I don't know where you'd go from there. It's like, well, we're fucked.
Like, it makes me, there's a book I read this year called Hell Followed Us Here, or I think I got the title wrong, but it like makes me think of religious nuts getting their hands on something they can't technically control but think they can, and that would be so interesting. But because I think we have such like an awesome indictment of the government, or is it confirmed that it's a government agency?
It's government.
It is government. That's right. Because I was like,
because the U.S. satellite. That's
right, the U.S. satellite. I was trying at one point. I was like, is this just a sketchy group of people who like say they're from the government, but like we have the sketchy government agency who has manufactured this whole terror. But then we get the next logical thing would be an indictment on religious attitudes in America, and that would have been such a cool sequel. Someone do it now. We could do it. I think we're it's time.
My only thing now is that they would do it CGI, and I know.
I think that's true. Good point.
And although the stop motion in the climax does not necessarily hold up as well, all the other stuff in the movie holds up incredibly well. You feel it because it's on screen, because it's happening there in front of the camera. And I'm just like, if it was CGI, it wouldn't be scary, and you wouldn't feel it. Like you wouldn't.
No, absolutely.
It wouldn't be as horrifying what's happening to the characters.
Well, I mean, just think about a CGI photo booth scene. Like it's so terrifying because you can it's actually
it sloshes in.
It sloshes in, and it's coming through the crack. And again, in this scene, but also a bunch of other scenes with the door is shut. They're like, oh, the door is shut. It's like, that's usually a sign of safety, but because it can go under the door, it's like, no, not even a shut door keeps you safe. And again, I think this movie does play with that idea of safety, and that we get so often in horror. Like in slashers, I feel like we always kind of know the formula of like, okay, we know where the safe zones are, but in the Blob, there is no safe zone, buddy. Like
the pipes, thing is come through the doors. It's just everywhere.
Everywhere. and again, like, this movie goes there and kills a kid, which we don't see it. It's always just a taboo subject of killing a kid, but in this one, it's like, oh no, we're not discriminating against like who is being and part of the blob, like everyone. And I think it hits this nihilism that isn't. I think was starting to come through. We get obviously hit the peak nihilism in the 2000s, but I think this was kind of hinting at this whole like, sorry guys, like. There is like a happy ending, but again, we get the at the end with the Reverend. Like there isn't actually a happy ending; it's just a reprieve, which I think is incredible.
Well, and even them like containing the blob at the end, there's like the inherent. It's subtle; they don't really address it, but like earlier in the movie, there's this conversation with Brian and one of the mechanics where they're like, it's a warm October, snow hasn't come. We didn't get snow. It's been a couple
years like that. Mm-hmm. It's climate change is already happening.
Exactly. We're very quietly talking about climate change at this point. At the very end, they're like, well, we got to get this guy to the ice house because we need to keep it frozen. And it's going to get to the point where there's not going to be a lot of snow and a lot of coldness. And so like inherent in here is that kind of, what do you do once it's in the ice house? Like, how do you get rid of it? You're just containing it at this point.
Right.
Have either of you seen Shin Godzilla?
I love Shin Godzilla.
No,
it's like the end of Shin Godzilla. I don't, not to spoil,
don't
spoilers,
spoil.
but
don't spoil.
I do want to watch it.
Yeah.
I do want to watch it.
It's a really, sorry, I won't say anything else though, but there is that terror.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. But like when I saw like, oh, they froze him, I was like, yeah, but that's not dead. Like we don't know how to actually kill it. We just immobilized it.
And that's the same as at the end of the original Blob when they dump it in the Arctic, and they're like, well, as long as the Arctic doesn't melt.
Right. And it's like the end, question mark.
Right.
And that was back in the 50s.
I know.
So one of the things that always makes me so sad, and we kind of touched on a little bit, was Fran and Herb. But like the way that this unfolds, where we have like this little meet. Well, it's not even a meet cute, but in terms of the movie, it's a meet cute. They're like at the diner, right? It's like this little cute thing, like would you want to go on a date with me? And then she slips in the paper and says I'm off at 11. It's like this hopefulness.
Will say, really quick, I thought I was gonna get creepy because she was like, I can't say no to the sheriff of the town. And I was like, ew, is he a creep? Like, is it just weird? But it ended up being cute. But I was like, I get 2023.
And then it goes so badly.
2023, I'm like, oh, all the cops are shit. And like, he is just like creepily hitting on her and won't leave her alone. Just projecting my own. Sorry, Terry.
Understandable. No, but what makes me so sad is, she gets out to the phone booth. She's like, I gotta call Herb. I gotta let the police know. And she gets a hold of the person on the phone, and she's like, he went to the diner. And at that moment is when his face like just shows up in the blob, and his eye, the effect of his eye, I think it's like his left eye that just sort of like
it's floating loose.
It's so good, but I'm just like,
but he blinks at one point too, I think, because my husband was like, he's blinking, he's still alive. I'm like, this is horrible.
It is.
Like, I've seen some shit, but like, this is a lot.
And
I love it. But wow.
And that's why this movie still upsets me to this day. I do love this movie now, but like even to watch it, because I was like, I had finally watched the whole thing a few years ago, and then I haven't watched it since. So I was watching it this time, and I was still just like, okay, come on, we can do this. Like I was still scared. This movie still scares me even to put it on. And it was like, okay, we're getting to that scene. Like, I don't have this reaction to movies anymore. I don't have that level of the closest thing I can think of to that level of discomfort is when like the secondhand embarrassment kind of scenes in like comedies and stuff. That's as close as I get to where like, oh, I can't watch this. I can't deal with this. But this movie does it with horror because of how it's written and how the effects are done, and it's just so upsetting.
Mm-hmm. Paul's death is still it's still incredibly well. I remember he was on, so Tony Gardner did the special effects for this, and he was initially hired to do like some small special effects, and then he ended up working on it long term. And Tony Gardner, of course, he created he was involved with like the Child's Play movies, doing the doll for Chucky.
That makes sense because there's a lot of times where a Chucky is in pain and it's also really upsetting.
Yeah, so like he's done like a lot. He did The Blob, he did Darkman, he worked on The Addams Family, Army of Darkness,
okay.
Hocus Pocus. He was the puppeteer for Binks.
Okay.
Like he has like a lot of experience, and he also worked on I think mostly the later Child's Play movies, but I'm not 100% certain.
Yeah, he replaced, I think it was like the third one, I think, that he came on. Third or fourth one he came on.
But he does incredible work in this movie. This movie, so he was on a podcast, they was talking about the scene with Paul, and they actually made like, and it's hard for me not to see it now, it kind of like ruined it a little bit, but there's like a blanket. They have like this weird, they call it the Blob blanket, I think, and they had it put over them, and they would pull it. And so that's what made it look like it was like pulling back his flesh, was that it was like this blanket that they were just pulling behind him. And so like it's really kind of cool now to watch it and kind of see that the kind of cracks in that scene of that doing it. But man, the amount of ingenuity in getting these effects from the 80s, it's so good. And that the Blob is gross. The Blob looks disgusting in
this. It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. It's like snot. It looks like a sentient pink snot. And like, I mean that as a compliment. Like, that's not meant to be a bad thing, but it looks like bubblegum and snot got together and made a horrifying cosmic baby.
That moment where it's chasing Brian and Meg to the freezer, and it like goes very quick over the ceiling, and it's like, that was like, I didn't know, I couldn't tell even while watching it that that's foam.
Yeah.
Like, that's just foam that they sprayed up, and it moves over them like that. And I'm like, that's genius, because it doesn't look like it at all.
No.
This movie's incredible. Yeah, this movie does need to be talked about more. Like, I feel like I hear people talk about it and compliment it.
People talk down about it. Like, I've seen that stuff on Twitter where they're just like, oh, the original Blob forever and stuff like that. Like to hell with the remake and stuff. And I'm just like, this is an amazing movie. And like, again, there was so much ingenuity to the effects and stuff. Like, it's incredible the work that goes into making something that's this unsettling and this like, ugh.
It has moments of dark comedy though too, like the editing. I know you Mary Beth, you mentioned your favorite smash cut, but like the editing between the Blob moving up the guy's arm and then quick cutting to the kid slurping Jello.
So
good.
I cheered because I'd heard about that before. Like, I'd heard of that moment, but when it happened, I was like, that's the best smash cut to ever exist. Like, there's no one, anything could ever tell me that is a better smash cut than the kid slurping the Jello off the plate. So good.
But you know, there are funny moments there, but it's like the deaths are never like the source of it, and I appreciate that. Like, they never give you that relief of feeling like you can laugh about somebody dying. It's always like terrible. But yeah, there is some humor, especially the early movie when you don't, like, things haven't gotten so bad yet. With the Jello smash cut, the whole thing with Paul coming to the house and the dad lowers the newspaper.
The condom ribs. I was like, that was incredible. And also, like, worst nightmare possible. Like, could you even imagine the embarrassment? Like, I'd be I have to leave and never come back. Like, absolutely horrendous.
I can never bring this guy to the house again.
No. But, like, I feel like this movie, again, we talked about this, like, plays with expectations, though, in terms of what we expect from horror. Like, we have, like, the couple making out in the car. And, you know, you expect a death, but not such a horrendous one, and such one that is so obviously rape. You know, like, It's always like the two horny teenagers, but like they're all into it. But here he's obviously sexually assaulting her, and then we have a horrendous death that I did cheer because I was like, yay, death to rapist. But I was like, but oh god, like, she also died. Like, it's right. Yeah. And then I also think, you know, we introduced the two little kids, and because it's an 80s film, I was like, okay, these are going to be our kids that save the day, because again, we're used to seeing the two little boys and like the sister comes in to help. But here, it's the sister who is saving the day.
Meg's the one who's like What's she say? Like, eat this, you son of a bitch, or something at the end with the...
Okay.
Incredible.
My sexuality is Shawnee Smith standing on the top of that car with her gun, shooting it, and saying, "Come on, you can do better than that, you son of a bitch!" Like,
it's so great. It's so great. She doesn't get the credit. Like, that character doesn't get the credit she deserves.
No,
I was gonna say, I'm sorry. We talk about everyone is so much loves Final Girl. So why don't we talk about her? She's the baddest bitch. The baddest bitch. She dove after the Blob. She's running into the movie theater of where everyone's is running out to save her brother. She's
and you
a
see
badass.
it on the seats and stuff, writhing around, and she's still in there. She's still in there saving her brother and his friend.
Well, and I think another thing I like about this movie too, it doesn't just focus on her heroism, but we have the close up of the person being digested. We don't get quick cuts, but we see if there's a young woman, you see her dead,
she
and they
pushes
lift
her
her
over,
up.
and she's only half eaten.
Yes.
And
so,
she's still alive. She's still alive.
This movie never wants to stop showing you, there's heroes here, but look what's going on to everyone else. I think it hits that balance so well that I think a lot of movies might sometimes miss out on in terms of wanting to focus on our heroes or, saving the day. But here, it's but we're still going to show you that, no matter what she's doing, people are getting digested, everywhere. And it's...
Yeah.
Wow.
It's really good at subverting expectations too, because Hailey, you mentioned thinking, and you, Mary Beth, as well, thinking that, Paul was going to be the hero and then he gets dissolved, right? Well, so the movie sets up all these people that could potentially be the hero. You have Kevin Dillon's character with his glorious mullet, who he's riding motorcycles. So immediately people are thinking Steve McQueen from the original, the Blob, motorcycle, that kind of stuff. Yep, he's going to be that character. No, it's Meg. Meg ends up being the hero of it. But the way the movie starts, it almost makes it feel as if the two men are going to be kind of the heroes, and it's not. It's all Meg, and she's there to save the day, save her family, yell, shooting a gun at the top of her lungs. It's so good. It's so good.
I honestly think she doesn't get talked about with the Final Girls because this movie is so frequently disrespected.
Yeah,
I just don't know why, though. That's the only thing. I wish I could figure out why it's so disrespected, because it doesn't make sense to me. It's just it happened to fall in this little gap where it's nobody wants that, and I'm just but I don't understand. I don't understand why this one why this particular movie.
I know.
Yeah, I don't get it. The yo-yo from the ceiling, too, by the way.
Oh, the yo-yo from the ceiling.
That was such a great setup, though, because you remember him playing with it, and then it comes down, and then you see, and that's one of the most horrifying moments to me, is him on the ceiling getting melted.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh.
The cop getting pulled in half through the barricade. There's just gleeful moments of violence in this movie that's just nope, we're gonna pull out all the stops, and it's exciting, and it's paced incredibly well. I was when I was watching it last night, I do watch this movie an awful lot, but I was watching it last night and I was oh wow, we're already at the climax, and it felt like it just started. It's just so much fun.
Beautiful domino effect of pacing. Again, Frank Darabont knows what he's doing. He's known since way back then. And he wrote the script. And I believe Chuck Russell also directed one of my favorite movies ever, Nightmare on Elm Street 3. And it's just you can see that same thing here. It's just the pacing is just this, then this, then this, and this is all colliding towards this amazing climax.
Yeah. Do we want to wrap up and give this our rating out of 5, Terry?
Sounds
anything
good.
Else we want to hit? Cool.
I think we've hit everything.
I know. There's so much to talk about with this movie, I always feel but... All right, Terry, how many Kevin Dillon mullets, glorious, beautiful mullets out of 5 do you give The Blob 1988?
I mean, this is an easy one for me. It's 5. I think this movie is perfect. This is a comfort movie watch. I was the last time I watched it was.
Sorry, I love horror fans who were The Blob is my comfort movie. An hour and a half of people getting absolutely fucking digested, and it's a comfort movie. And I get it, but we're a cool bunch of people.
Yeah, so I had watched this maybe I think it was last year. The last time I watched it, it was for guesting on the Psychoanalysis podcast because they were doing a comfort episode. I was this is my comfort episode. I love this movie so much. I think most of the effects stands up to today. I think it is darkly comedic. I think it's nihilistic in the best way that I like my nihilistic movies to be. It subverts expectations. I think this movie has everything for it. It makes me sad when people don't give it the same respect that I think The Fly and The Thing get. And yeah, I think some of it might be tinged by nostalgia, but I think this is a perfect movie. It is 5 Kevin Dillon's glorious mullets out of 5. Kevin Dillon.
Kevin Dillon.
What about you, Mary Beth?
So I am not tinged with nostalgia, and I also think it's a 5. It's a 5 mulleter out of 5.
Yay.
I was so excited to watch this because I've been meaning to. And Hailey, when you said The Blob, I was like, "Oh, thank God! I finally am like gonna have my ass kicked into watching this movie." And as someone who loves The Thing, I was like, this is this is in the same caliber to me. And I think, again, we've talked about the differences, but here I think, the pacing that affects, like, the way that this whole movie unfolds is just so incredibly impressive. And also, our final girl. I'm not going to start talking about Meg as a final girl that needs more recognition, because she is such a badass. She's an incredible woman in horror, as we talk about. I think she is a character that needs to have more attention for all of the badass stuff she does. And this movie doesn't let up. It says fuck the government, and it says like fuck religion, and I love that, especially in 1988. I think this is an incredible piece of horror cinema. So this is a 5 to Kevin Dillon mullets for me.
Hell yeah.
Hailey, you have the final word. How many mullets do you give this movie?
I also give this 5 out of 5 mullets. I don't know if I have a nostalgia factor with it necessarily, because I was so terrified to continue watching it. But I definitely think that it's I think pacing, script, like, it's really just on it. It's firing on all cylinders. The effects still hold up. Even the stop motion I mentioned, it's not even the stop motion that I think is an issue. It's just the blue screen against the stop motion. It's really, that's it. And that's so brief that who cares? It's an amazing horror movie. I would love to see it get more respect in the community. It's hard to believe, looking at the effects, that it is over 30 years old.
I know.
But it is, so 5 out of 5 for me. I really think they made something amazing with this.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much, Hailey, for joining us to talk about The Blob, because I could talk about The Blob every single day. It's like, it's so good. But where can our listeners find you, and what do you have coming up that you'd like to talk or plug? The floor is yours.
Let's see. So I have 3 books coming out this year, as long as everything goes as planned.
Just 3.
Yeah, it's nothing. No big deal. Just 3. I'm going to try to never have that happening again, because my brain is all over the place.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Cruel Angels Past Sundown should be coming from Death's Head Press. It's my splatter western book. Ooh. Even the Worm Will Turn, which is the sequel to The Worm and His Kings, should be coming out in the summer. And then A Light Most Hateful is my small town horror novel. Will be coming out in October 10th from Titan Books.
Hell yeah!
And then I'm at www.haileypiper.com. On Twitter at Hailey Piper Says, and all their social media at Hailey Piper Fights.
Hell yeah! And everyone will have links to all that in the show description. So go read a book or all of them of Hailey's. But listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. What was your experience with The Blob 1988? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm McGailey Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. And if you want to help support us, we do have a Patreon where we're releasing a lot of content, so go check that out.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.